Thank you so much. I think to a few of you out there, I might be a familiar face now. Lee Woolley, I'm the Region President for BNY Mellon Wealth Management out of Philadelphia. Delighted as always to be a sponsor for our evening with Ron Granieri, but also this evening with Ben Silberstein. I think he's awesome. I would say he's a North Korean rock star, but that is a bit of an oxymoron, I believe. So anyway, we're delighted that Ben could enlighten us on the situation in North Korea this evening, and without any further ado, I'll turn it over to our good friends, Ron Granieri and Ben Silberstein. Thanks, guys.
Well, that was exciting. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is Tuesday in Philadelphia, and the world is as complicated as ever. So, let's talk about it. Welcome to the December 2017 edition of Geopolitics with Granieri, FPRI's monthly discussion of international affairs. I'm Ron Granieri, Executive Director of FPRI's Center for the Study of America and the West, your host and moderator of today's discussion. All of us at FPRI, thank you for joining us today, live and archived on the internet, and live this evening on December the 5th, 2017 at the National Liberty Museum in Philadelphia. It is a pleasure to have you all with us. Media outlets refer to often Afghanistan as America's longest war. Yet, that terrible and seemingly endless conflict has not been going on a third as long as the longest unresolved and ongoing conflict facing the United States, in Korea. Although the armistice of 1953 ended active fighting, the Korean War remains unresolved. The peninsula still divided, and the question of relations between the United States, South Korea, and North Korea remains as painfully open today as it has been at any time over the past 64 years. South Korea has become one of the great success stories of the modern world, a triumph of economic and political development that even recent presidential scandals have not quite been able to tarnish. North Korea, on the other hand, has made headlines for other reasons. Notoriously paranoid and secretive, North Korea is the world's only nominally communist hereditary monarchy, governed since its founding by the Kim dynasty, who claim to be the true defenders of national honor against foreign invaders. Prizing the stability and survival of their regime over secondary concerns, such as the freedom or well-being of their citizens, Kim Jong-Un, his father and grandfather, each invested enormous, scarce resources in the military, especially programs in nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, and have paired those capabilities with rhetoric claiming a willingness to use these weapons in pursuit of the regime's ultimate goals. All of which brings us to a day when a regime that is unable to feed its population or maintain a national electric grid may possess the ability to threaten some of the most populous and prosperous cities on earth with nuclear annihilation. As frightening as that prospect is on its own, it has taken on even greater significance as the Trump administration has flirted with apocalyptic language of its own, declaring the time for talking to be at an end or threatening to rain fire and fury on North Korea. Both sides have indulged in tit-for-tat insults between their leaders. Now, successive American administrations have declared a nuclear North Korea to be unacceptable, but none have been willing or able to stop it thus far. And it may already be too late. For now, the talking continues, but the players appear far away from any resolution. Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul have emphasized unity in the face of the threat from Pyongyang, but each face different political and strategic pressures. China is North Korea's patron, but Xi Jinping's government has played, at best, an ambivalent role in restraining its client. Russia also has an interest in stability in Northeast Asia, as suggested by recent FPRI publications by, among others, Artyom Lukin and Renz Lee, but has yet to play a constructive role. So what does Kim Jong-un want? How should the Trump administration and the international community as a whole deal with Pyongyang? With whom can and should Washington cooperate in search of a solution? Can the world live with a nuclear North Korea? If so, for how long? These questions, and yours, will guide us in discussion tonight with our guest, Benjamin Silberstein. Benjamin Katzeff-Silberstein is an associate scholar at FPRI, focusing primarily on the Korean Peninsula and East Asian region. He is a doctoral candidate in the Department of History at the University of Pennsylvania, where he researches the history of surveillance and social control in North Korea, and is a co-editor of North Korean Economy Watch. In addition to his writings for FPRI, he publishes regularly on Korean affairs in publications such as Jane's Intelligence Review and The Diplomat, and has previously worked as both a journalist and a special advisor to the Swedish Minister for International Development Cooperation. A rising scholar in one of the world's most fascinating and complex regions, and a brilliant representative of the kind of work being done right here in Philadelphia, we are delighted to have him with us tonight. Welcome, Benjamin Silberstein.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. It's always a great pleasure to get to, I think for any academic, to get to talk about the area that you work on for a full hour and conversation with such a great audience. I also just want to mention, you mentioned the report by Artyom Lukin and Renz Lee. This is a report about Russia's potential role in the Korean conflict, published by FPRI last week. It is really, really phenomenal. And the group of Russian scholars that have put it together, as well as two American scholars that I've worked with FPRI for a long time, it really is among think tank publications, it really stands out for its depth. So if you haven't read it already, I would really encourage you to do so.
This is good. I like that. That's a good form of cross-promotion here at FPRI.
Yeah.
So,
totally honest.
Which makes it even better, right? You know, it's always good when you can actually say what you think and it's something that people want to hear. Which leads us to the question of rhetoric. So, all rhetoric aside, how likely is a military confrontation on the Korean Peninsula today?
So, I wish I could give an exact percentage for this likelihood, because that's what people in this business tend to do. And I've heard people in DC talk about, some people say 30%. I think that's the most commonly cited number for the percentage likelihood of an armed conflict. One person I talked to said 50% chance. But at the end of the day, I don't think these numbers tell us very much, to be honest. But I will say that from my own horizon, it seems like armed conflict in Korea has not been this likely for many decades, especially given the sentiment in Washington that this is really, that enough is enough, sort of, with North Korea. Problem is that it might already be too late, but I think that definitely increases the likelihood of armed conflict right now.
So to phrase the question provocatively, so is enough enough?
It really depends on your objectives, I think. I mean, if the objective is to achieve full denuclearization of North Korea, to make North Korea give up the idea of nuclear weapons, that is, I think, without war, that won't happen. There's no way, virtually. So, and that, at the moment, when you try to look for what the objectives are of the United States right now, that seems to be it. Like, that's the one line that's constantly given. And that, I think, is the main reason why war is not, while I don't think it's likely, it's also not entirely unlikely, because the objectives are just conflicting right now.
Does it make sense for the United States or for any player in the region to say a nuclear North Korea is unacceptable when it's pretty clear we already have a nuclear North Korea?
No, that definitely does not. And that's, I mean, I keep seeing these tweets from, I remember after one of the nuclear tests where I think, the most recent one, where there were very, very few experts in the field who did not believe that this is credible right now. And you still have the Department of State Twitter account writing things like the United States will never accept a nuclear North Korea, while that has basically already happened.
So what will it take? We're going to come to North Korea in a second, but from an American perspective, what would it take to climb down from the demand or from the statement that a nuclear North Korea is unacceptable?
You mean what else you can hope for, or
I guess it's a question of what can you do if I say what you're doing is unacceptable, and you keep doing it, or what if you even say I have done it
Yeah.
What do you do then?
Yeah. Well, I think one potential off-ramp in a situation like that is to not even say anything about, whether or not something is acceptable, to just leave that aside. You can say that in the long run, the United States is not prepared to live with a nuclear North Korea, but while taking steps in the short term to sort of to lessen the tensions a little bit. So you don't have to give up on that objective necessarily. You don't have to, as long as you don't put a time limit on it. If you say that a nuclear North Korea, like if we don't have denuclearization by this or that date, that is unacceptable. That creates a very, very narrow frame for what you can do. But if you just leave it as an open goal for policy, that's a different story, I think.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the North Korean regime, to Kim Jong-un. Right? It's not uncommon in American public life, American media, American popular opinion, to imagine him as irrational or as a figure of fun. But when you look at Kim Jong-un's policies, you look at what he is pursuing, is he ultimately a rational actor or not?
I believe he is, for sure. And I think that if you look at things if you try to step into North Korea's perspective here and look at, if you assume, which I believe is true, that regime survival, and not national survival or anything like that, but the survival of the North Korean regime is the most important objective of the government, and it has been for decades, ever since the Korean War. If that is your ultimate objective, there's really no better way of getting there than a nuclear deterrent. Mm-hmm. And especially after what happened in Libya in 2011, Iraq in 2003, and we have many other examples. The Iran deal might become one of them as well. North Korea has learned a great deal from these events, and they've learned that, sure, you can try to strike a deal with the West, but ultimately you can't trust them. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I just think that that's very clear that that's how North Korea sees reality.
So what do you think the Kim government ultimately hopes to gain here? We can say, you say stability. Obviously Kim doesn't want to end up like Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. But what is the medium to long-term vision for the North Korean regime?
So again, if you listen to if you read what North Korean outlets are saying and what Kim Jong-un is saying in speeches and things like that, then it's pretty clear that, well, first of all, a nuclear deterrent to ensure that they will not be attacked by the United States or by any other country in the region. Second thing is there's a guiding phrase for the North Korean government under Kim Jong-un called, in Korean it's called Byongjin, which essentially means parallel development. And it refers to the idea that you can develop nuclear weapons and the economy at the same time. Mm-hmm. It was originally invented by Kim Il-sung in the 1960s, but Kim Jong-un sort of reinvigorated this phrase when he came to power. And I mean, the idea really is that when so in the North Korean worldview, the poverty and the sort of lack of investment in the people's livelihood and things like that all stems from the fact that they need to spend so much on their military. There are a lot of logical issues with that statement, but I mean, any government can choose what sort of policy line they want to pursue. But the idea is that when they're done when they feel like they have complete control over their own destiny militarily, then they can turn to other things, to developing the economy more. I think that's the medium-term goal.
So, but nobody's been able to identify exactly what that moment would look like. Do they seek a treaty with the United States, for
I think they seek a treaty. They seek a peace treaty. They want to end the Korean War. That's one thing. Mm-hmm. They seek a peace treaty and formal recognition by the United States. That's another thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think that any of these things would make them give up their nuclear weapons, though. That's a totally different story. They had said in the past that if they could get a peace treaty with the United States, they would be prepared to give up their nukes, but I think it's very unlikely that they actually would. Mm-hmm. So these are some medium-term goals. I think in the long run, we really can't discount reunification of the Korean Peninsula as a North Korean goal. Mm-hmm. I think it's still very much within the leadership's vision that one day Korea will be one country and that North Korea will be the main ruling power.
I want to come back to that reunification question in a minute.
It's a big one.
Because it is a big one. But I guess what I'd really be curious about, though, is so if it's unclear to think of what the United States could offer North Korea that would get them to give up their nuclear weapons. Can North Korea be deterred? Like, so if they're looking for deterrence for regime survival, the reason why the world is concerned about North Korea having nuclear weapons is because they're afraid that they're not deterrable themselves. Is North Korea deterrable?
I would say yes and no.
All right.
I would say yes and maybe no, because I think it's very unlikely that North Korea would, out of the blue, launch a nuclear weapon against the Washington D.C. or L.A. or any city in the United States or any city in South Korea for that matter. There's just nothing to gain from that. But I think the fear, and which I think is very warranted in the long run, is that North Korea will start making claims on South Korean territory, such as the islands and the archipelago of the Korean Peninsula, and to the northwest in South Korea, which has happened many times. There have been skirmishes there. And the fear is that North Korea will eventually start making demands on South Korea for things like economic cooperation or take concrete steps towards reunification or even territory. And that in a scenario like that they would have this nuclear sword of Damocles sort of hanging over the peninsula. But deterrable, yes, but it doesn't mean that they're not dangerous.
What is and what should be the ultimate goal of American policy in the Korean Peninsula?
That's a tough one. It really depends on...
We ask the tough questions here.
Yeah, no, sure do. I think that one very important goal is to ensure to show to the world and to North Korea that the United States stands behind its allies in East Asia, Japan and South Korea, and to make that commitment absolutely clear that we are prepared. Well, I'm actually not from the U.S. I'm from Sweden, but I'm going to say we anyway. That the U.S. is prepared to take action to protect its allies. I think that is a very, very important thing in order to deter North Korea, to show that the U.S. stands by its commitments.
There have been recent reports that the new president of South Korea wants to pursue a more conciliatory policy toward the North. And related to that is the suggestion that there is a divergence in goals and in strategy between Washington and Seoul. How real are those differences, or are the fundamentals of the relationship? When you say the United States wants to show its partners that it's serious about their commitments, what exactly do the South Koreans want the United States to commit to?
Yeah, so I didn't with saying that. I meant that it's a goal that the United States should have.
Sure.
I think that in the past few months and even the hints that the defense cooperation with South Korea is in danger is very, very problematic. So what South Korea wants, I think, really comes from the fact that it's right by North Korea. It's something that we can sort of. Some pundits tend to be very critical of the current South Korean government for being too conciliatory with the North, and sort of argue that the South Korea is breaking this this united policy that South Korea and the U.S. should have. But they're right there. South Korea has a bigger interest in avoiding war than the United States has, even though everyone has an interest in avoiding war. I think the South Korean government is very much driven by this political idea in South Korea about cooperation with North Korea. The so-called Sunshine Policy under Kim Dae-jung, a president in the early 2000s in South Korea, basically meant that the South Korean government supported economic exchange and cooperation with North Korea, basically underwriting very, very risky economic projects in North Korea that really didn't lead to any significant financial gain for anyone except for the North Korean regime. So I think more exchanges, more of those types of activities might be something that the South Korean government would want to see in the medium term. I think in the immediate term, they want to make sure that a war doesn't break out. So
that's a good immediate term goal.
I think so, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the regime in North Korea. You specialize, you study surveillance.
Bringing it home to my home turf.
That's after I've softened you up a little bit. But what, if anything, makes North Korean communism different in practice from other communist states, or different in practice from other authoritarian states that exist out there in the world today?
Give me 3 years for my dissertation, and I'll give you the final answer on this.
We'll bring you back.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take that as a promise.
All right.
North Korean communism is very different from sort of Soviet style, if we could term that sort of average communism, in a lot of ways. I think number one is the person-centered system. The North Korean regime derives its legitimacy from the heritage of Kim Il-sung, North Korea's first president, and the people around him in the top of power who fought against the Japanese colonial regime in Korea. Korea was a Japanese colony between 1910 and 1945. So that is, I think, the clearest difference, that it's really not about, the ideology is so fundamentally about the person here, and it's been a very good way for the regime to stay in power for as long as it has.
Indeed. I'm curious about this because the fact that North Korea plays on its role as a leader in the national struggle for unification, right? That doesn't make North Korea different, right? North Vietnam was like that too.
Yeah.
But it's this personalist element that fascinates me, because I ask, what's in it? I can understand why the Kims like it that way. What's in it for the institutions of the North Korean regime that they are still tied in with this family and with this personality? If any monarchy requires a kind of willing suspension of disbelief and buy-in, how deep is the buy-in among institutions like the army or the secret police? And is there a line that, say, a Kim Jong-un would not want to cross to upset those stakeholders?
I mean, I think that if, also first of all, on the question of how strong the buy-in is, everyone who holds any sort of power in North Korea owes it to the Kim family in one way or the other. The North Korean regime it's like the construction of the North Korean regime is not a bad one for the goals that they wanted to achieve at all. It's lasted far, far longer than anyone believed a couple of decades ago. And I mean, I really think the Kim family has been extremely good at this, about constantly purging people who pose any sort of threat to the unified power around the Kim family. But even family members are at risk if you go too far. There's the Kim Jong-un executed his uncle Chang Song-taek in late 2013. The reason was that he had amassed, there were a lot of reasons, but the most fundamental one was that he had amassed too much power himself and too much financial resources by selling North Korean coal to China. So,
and then, of course, there's how he handled his half-brother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty clear.
Sent him a message in the airport. Well, and along those lines, right, the problem with any dynasty is when you run out of heirs.
Yeah.
Does Kim Jong-un have a family yet? I know he's married. Does he have any children?
So it's I mean, he may have far more children than we know of, and they might be in different area codes or different countries. You know, it's there's no clear. I mean, he is very young. I mean, he's in his early 30s. When Kim Jong-il came to power, he was, let me think, I can't remember his exact age, but he was much, much older.
Much older, yeah.
So Kim Jong-un, barring any unforeseen event, he's gonna be there for quite a long time, assuming that nothing goes wrong. I think that the question of regime stability in North Korea is one where we can try our very best to assess how stable the regime is.
Right.
But once something goes in a direction that no one has predicted, everyone is going to claim that they saw it coming all along.
That's what historians do.
Yeah.
Come on, let's,
yeah.
Well, so in other words, it's possible that Kim Jong-un could be a problem for the Barron Trump administration someday.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, absolutely. It's the story continues.
Just want to see if anybody's paying attention out there. Well, let's talk about the other actors in the neighborhood. When President Trump visited East Asia recently, right, there was a lot of talk about the cooperation between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. That certainly Japan and South Korea both have an interest in stability, peace, and no war. But Japan and South Korea do not agree on everything, and there are significant historical burdens on that relationship. Has the recent action by North Korea brought South Korea and Japan closer together?
That's a tough question. I mean, it would seem like it has for the moment when there's a very, very clear common problem at hand. But North Korea has been a problem for a long time, and we still know that South Korea and Japan have had very, very big issues with things like intelligence sharing, which it would seem like it would be in their common interests to work on these things, but they still choose not to. Working with Japan is extremely controversial in South Korea. and vice versa. It's probably more controversial in South Korea than working with South Korea is in Japan. But it's an important question. I'm not really sure how to answer it. But
because the North Koreans, of course, have argued for a long time, right, that South Korea is essentially a creation of the Japanese and the Americans. Right?
They've argued that South Korea is basically a leftover colonial, like the puppets, the former puppets of the colonial government. There are a lot of, in early North Korea, again, getting very nerdy here, but there were a lot of people left over in the administration from the former Japanese one, but that's sort of a sidetrack. Yeah, I mean, but interestingly enough, though, when North Korea has pretty often made statements that fall on South Korea's side in diplomatic rows with Japan, such as on the Dokdo Islands, for example, outside of the Korean coast, which Japan makes claims to as well. North Korea gets as mad about this as South Korea does. So there's a point of unity, really.
They think that's going to belong to them someday, too.
Yeah, yeah. Maps do not, like, official maps in North Korea do not distinguish between North and South Korea. They don't in South Korea either, by the way. So.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So then what about China?
Yeah.
Right, in all of this, right? It's pretty clear that the administration came into office with pretty high hopes that China was going to solve the North Korea problem, and not just the administration in Washington. I would say much of the rest of the world was kind of crossing their fingers and figuring this was just a matter of if China really got involved, they'd be able to fix this.
Yeah.
They haven't. Maybe they can't. Have we overestimated the degree of influence that the Chinese have over North Korea?
I don't think that we've overestimated the degree of coercive potential influence that China has on North Korea.
Fair.
If China wanted to, I mean, they could block North Korea off from a lot of telecommunications. They could essentially suspend some very important, I mean, they could suspend oil deliveries to North Korea. They could suspend all trade with North Korea, which I mean,
is like 85%.
90, around, something around 90. So yeah, they have a great deal of leverage. But I think it's also a matter of, like, China values stability more than anything else in its own region. And China is extremely reluctant, and I would argue would likely never push North Korea far enough for sort of, they would never push North Korea to the extent that they would risk society really, really suffering in a very severe way.
Is it fair to say that China defines stability in the region as the permanent division of the Korean Peninsula?
For now, yes, absolutely. And I think we had a very important moment just a few days ago when the U.S. said to China, I'm not sure how this was, like through what channels other than the Security Council that was expressed, but the U.S. basically said China should stop deliveries of crude oil to North Korea. I think that is sort of the brick wall of how far the U.S. can push China in this. Because President Trump has been, I would argue, more successful than any other U.S. president in the past couple of decades when it comes to making China take concrete action against North Korea. China is enforcing sanctions against North Korea in a way that they never have before. And it's a pretty remarkable feat. I just don't think it's enough.
Well, and I'm curious because there are certainly the Trump administration has had some pretty significant successes both in pushing the Chinese to work on this, but also in encouraging America's allies to put diplomatic pressure on North Korea. And I am curious, since you said it, to what do you attribute their greater success? The fact that they are more focused on this problem than the Obama administration?
I would say so. They're more focused on the problem. They put it higher on the agenda, which is also an effect of how far North Korea has come in its missile tests, too. I think that in the Obama administration, there was always sort of the tacit understanding that denuclearization was a very, very difficult goal to achieve. I think...
And in diplomatic speak, when I say something's very, very difficult, I'm saying it's
virtually
not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, yeah. But with the Trump administration has seen it very differently. And they've really, none of these channels of pressuring North Korea have been unknown, but they just haven't been used to the same extent. And they've really, the current administration has used a lot of political capital on asking allies for pretty big favors when it comes to North Korea, and they've really followed through, it seems.
Since you mentioned the historian's trap of waiting until after things happen and explaining why they're inevitable, the fact that the Trump administration has succeeded in these sorts of ways, in part because they were willing to ask.
Yeah.
Will that, do you think, that may influence when people go back and write this history of this relationship? Will they wonder why previous administrations didn't ask? Or is it just that it took this long for North Korea to become enough of a threat to wake everybody up?
It's a really great question. I think we should first need to spell out some of the things that have happened real quick. So North Korea has conducted a significant amount of trade through Southeast Asia, for example. And the Trump administration has been very, very forceful in telling these countries that this is very, very important for the US that you stop trade with North Korea. Countries like Singapore, Singapore is one example out of several, but that's one of the most important things that's happened. And also, of course, pressuring China to enforce UN sanctions. When people go back and study this, I think that that might be overshadowed by how high tensions have risen too. I really don't know, but I think that that's really going to be, depending on the political affiliation of the historians in the future who write this history, but I still think that the current administration will get some degree of credit if this leads to a nuclear war breaking out. I'm not sure about that, but
I guess it depends on
we're all dead. And
depends on what the history is being written on, right?
Exactly.
If it's in books or if it's written on cave walls, it might sound a little different.
Really doesn't need to get to that point. Just
that's
putting it out there.
Very important. That's right. No, that's all right.
Yeah.
But it is an important question because one wonders, right? There is a lot of criticism of the Trump administration, but they can point to very specific accomplishments that previous administrations couldn't.
Absolutely.
I have to say that.
Absolutely.
I want to bring the rest of the audience in on this conversation. So the first question, as ever, on Geopolitics with Granieri, the first question goes to someone who has never been in the audience for Geopolitics with Granieri before. Is there a first-time visitor to this show who would like to ask a question? Or I'll let you think about that while I ask one more. How's that? I'll ask you one more question, Ben. And that is, how did you get into studying North Korea?
Okay, that's. I was not prepared for that question, to be honest.
I find that
short version or long version.
Let's go with the short version.
Okay.
Somebody will come up with a question.
So I got interested in North Korea because one day when I was in my mid-teens, as bizarre as it sounds, I kept hearing about North Korea on the news and just how it was so closed. And then I started looking for pictures I just got this idea that I have to see what it looks like in an ordinary person's home inside North Korea. The more personal reason is that my grandparents, two of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and that gave me a very, very early interest in totalitarianism and life under totalitarian regimes. And I'm still looking for that picture of an average North Korean person's home, and it's been about 14 years now. So we'll see if I ever get there. But that sort of understanding the way this regime operates and what life is like there is really what drives me personally.
And when did you start learning the Korean language?
When I was about 20. I went to study abroad in South Korea in order to learn Korean, and then I stayed for a couple of years.
So you've been to the South, but you have not been to the North.
I've been to the North once. Yeah. My first summer after graduating high school, I went on a tour there. It's a lot easier for Swedish citizens to get a visa for North Korea, so that helped.
So looking for a question from the audience from somebody right here. Yes, the microphone will come to you.
I just wanted to share that I've been doing work in South Korea for a while, and I don't know if people realize it, but there is such pain and suffering in Korea, multi-generations, because, there is a lot of anger there. The idea that, I don't know what year it was, but the U.S. diplomat made a line in the middle of the peninsula, and what they say is nobody cared that they were going to completely destroy families. So there are people, older people that have no family in South Korea, and it goes down on so there's a level of suffering and pain and disconnection in Korea that is really quite something. And so there's such a need to come together, as one country. And I'm just wondering, what influence does that have both on North Korea and South Korea's political policies, because this is where the people are at.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. I'm very glad that you brought up this dimension, because it's extremely important, especially, I think, since we're talking about U.S.-South Korean relations and the policy divergence. It's not just about South Korea being right next to North Korea that drives policies of more for more reconciliation. It's also the fact that this is the deep sorrow that really is so strongly ingrained in Korean political culture and social culture as well of the division. Because, like you mentioned, there's still people alive. There are sadly fewer and fewer, but to whom the idea of a divided Korea is completely bizarre. Like, you would split up the United States into halves for no apparent reason. And that is a factor that we really shouldn't discount. I think that often when we talk about, especially in discussions of geopolitics, it tends to be about very tangible material interests. But there is, the vision of unification in Korea, I think, both on the part of South Korea and North Korea, it's not necessarily, it is, you could argue that it's an aggressive one, but it's also one that stems from a deep wound in Korea. So absolutely. There's even an expression for sort of historically amassed sorrows in Korean, Han. I don't know if we have any Korean speakers in the audience, but this is, which I think says a lot.
Deeply held sorrow.
Yeah.
Right here. Yes, please.
What are the sources of the expanded nuclear capability in North Korea, both technical and equipment and
Right.
Yeah.
expertise? Other state actors, non-state actors?
So this is, it's still very much debated, but so the roots, in the very earliest days of the North Korean nuclear program, a lot of technical learning came through scientists from the former Soviet Union, for example, who were suddenly out of a job when developing the Soviet nuclear deterrent. Well, further developing it wasn't really something they could do anymore. North Korea has learned a great deal from sort of networks in Pakistan, and also where the exact components come from is really outside of it's not something that I could answer right now, but we shouldn't underestimate the degree to which the North Korean nuclear program, especially in the last few years, is really something that has been developed domestically, which I think speaks to the degree of learning and expertise in North Korea.
Does North Korea have its own sources of uranium, plutonium?
They have uranium on the Korean Peninsula. In North Korea. I'm going to have to get back to you on whether or not that's what's being used for the actual nukes right now. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. In the back, and then we'll move forward. Right, there's the next person with the microphone in here. Right here on the side. Okay. Right here. There you go.
At the beginning after the new election with the new regime in South Korea, it seemed that there was a leaning toward the previous position of Kim Dae-jung. However, after that, of course, there were so many new nuclear tests and missile tests, et cetera, plus the change in the United States. Does that appear to still have any sway or power in South Korea with a possible approach toward North Korea?
So first, just spell out what the policy of Kim Dae-jung was. It refers to the policy of sort of exchange and cooperation and sort of coming closer with North Korea. I don't think that's an idea that's gone away at all in South Korea, and I don't think it's likely to, just because that's sort of, when you want to try to heal this historical wound or like to achieve something to get closer to mending this artificial division, it's really one of the few concrete things that you can actually do. So I don't think that's an idea that's dead at all. It's very, very far away right now. But these things change over time very, very quickly sometimes.
Let's go right. You can hand the microphone right over to here. There you go.
I understand from what I've read that at this point in time, we, the United States, do not have an ambassador in South Korea. Can you tell me, is that a real detriment given the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, and Why is it that we don't have an ambassador there?
Yeah, I think we're all acutely aware of how long the how there's been a slightly problematic process of appointments in the Trump administration. There is one person who people had speculated about from for many months, and there's also been news that this person, I don't know if is FPRI going to get sued if I say his name, or probably shouldn't, because it's just not. I'll leave that for.
What? That's right.
Well,
the president doesn't seem to be concerned.
Right. There's been speculation that a person who was George W. Bush's Asia-Pacific policy advisor named Victor Cha would be, it's been in news reports, so it doesn't really matter, that he would be appointed ambassador to South Korea and that he's under vetting right now for that job. He's been tweeting mostly about baseball matches in the past few weeks. I don't know if that tells us anything at all.
Might be an
that might be proof, yeah,
right?
maybe, who knows? He would be a very natural choice, I think, given that the administration is a Republican one for one, and they're looking for someone who really knows Korea, which Victor Cha does. Is it a problem that the U.S. doesn't have an ambassador right now? I think it's a problem because you don't have. There are interlocutors between South Korea and the United States for sure, but an ambassador carries much more weight than someone who is there temporarily in that type of role. Because if you're an ambassador, it's assumed, and I don't know if this is something that will change, but it's assumed that you speak for the country in question. So it is definitely a problem that the U.S. doesn't have an ambassador in South Korea right now, and hopefully we will soon.
Yes.
What is the risk of North Korea sharing its gains in delivery systems and in the bomb itself with countries of other concern to the United States, Iran in particular?
I think that risk is pretty great. North Korea does not have a lot of sources of foreign currency income. Coal is one of few of them. So if your goal with sanctions is to close up North Korea's earnings through exports, that's a very good way to go. The problem is that the more of these trade ties you close down through international sanctions, the more narrow the frame becomes for North Korea to actually make money. So I think that, in a way, it's possible that sanctions in the long run might increase the risk of North Korea selling this type of technology abroad. And they have in the past. They've sold missiles to a whole range of countries, some of which are very problematic for the U.S. So I don't think that. Just look at the North Korean nuclear reactor in Syria. That was
for example.
What year was that? 2006 or something?
2007.
2007, which Israeli Air Force destroyed. 4 North Korean citizens, I believe, were killed in that strike. So this has happened before, and I see no reason why it wouldn't happen again.
Yes.
If North and South Korea did reunify, wouldn't that be a humanitarian disaster? You would have all these North Koreans who know nothing about the real world trying to merge with sophisticated, cosmopolitan South Koreans. What's your take?
Yeah, no, I think I'm not sure I would go as far as saying humanitarian disaster just because South Korea is a very, very wealthy country, especially compared to North Korea. This is the other side, sort of that coin of this sorrow over the division. The problem for people who want unification, one of them is that the people who support that in South Korea are becoming fewer and fewer because of what you mentioned, the burden that South Korea would need to carry. If you look at opinion polls, the younger generation of South Koreans are increasingly reluctant to support unification if it means that their taxes will increase.
So I have to say, as someone who studies Germany, I can tell you
right.
that the Germans talked about reunification for a long time,
Right.
were completely unprepared for it when the opportunity presented itself in 1989.
Yeah.
And despite the wealth of Germany, they are still actually
Right.
in the current
Yeah.
debates over government. They're debating whether to finally abolish the solidarity tax that was established to pay for unification.
And I think the differences are about 14 times bigger between North and South Korea. So yes, that's the short answer. There would be a big disaster. The question is, would South Korea really allow anyone who wants to come over to come over? There, I think it's entirely possible that they might just occupy North Korea and sort of limit migration. Something
Interesting.
like that.
Let's go here and then we'll go there. Go ahead.
I wanted to get back to the rationality of the regime and Kim. It seems to me President Bush started saying we have this axis of evil that we're going to get, and the country we picked to make war in was the only country who didn't have a nuclear program. And we now have people like they're in a schoolyard making names to each other. I'm going to get you, and you're a rocket man, and you're a fat old man. And isn't Kim really being rational by saying I need nuclear weapons to make sure the United States does not destroy our country and me?
Even paranoids have real enemies.
Yeah. So I think that in a way, yes. It's very, very hard. So part of, to get back to you started this question with going back to the rationality points. North Korea, the North Korean strategy, so this aura of craziness around North Korea, I think it's probably, well, first of all, I believe it's a conscious choice. There are, for example, the Kim Jong-il's ideological mentor, Hwang Jang-yeop, who defected to South Korea in 1997, has talked about this, that we realize that we need to wrap our country in sort of a veil of fog or the like in order to make people at least plant the idea that we have weapons with incredibly destructive capacity. Because if you're presented with the option of, okay, we could strike North Korea, there is a 10% chance that they have nuclear weapons and will hit back at one of our allies or even at us. Are you really prepared to risk nuclear war over that? That's what it really comes down to. Mm-hmm. So it's really, really smart, I think, to like the fact that we were even talking about whether or not North Korea is rational. I think if you look at what that idea, what implications that has even higher up in government circles, if you don't know entirely if your opponent is rational, then you're going to be very cautious, I think. So, and there have been times when the US has been very close to ordering strikes on North Korea in the mid-1990s when there was another crisis around North Korea's nuclear weapons. I think we might even have come closer than we are today.
What do we know about North Korean military planning? People talk about the number of artillery pieces or missiles that they have on alert, but do we know? Do we have a sense of what the North Koreans would do in the event of a crisis? Would they simply, for example, just launch everything at Seoul to punish the South Koreans as fast as they could?
So I don't think that. So first of all, no, we don't know anything. But I think that from what we can infer, I don't think that is necessarily the only thing that could happen. There are a lot of we can't jump to the conclusion that if the U.S. would say take out a launch site for a rocket, that North Korea would launch an all-out nuclear war. There are a lot of other steps they could take as well. Mm-hmm. But I think that we know a few things, just given the fact that North Korea has very limited resources. I think they have, when it comes to oil, for example, it's estimated that they have enough to last for 3 months of warfare with South Korea. So, I mean, it kind of tells us that the only way that they could hope to achieve any sort of gains is by just going all out in sort of a blitzkrieg-style warfare of putting forth as much force as they can right away. Mm-hmm. But no, I think it's very, very hard to tell.
Mm-hmm. Right here, please.
Is there any effort to provide nuclear electricity in North Korea? It would seem to me that's one of the ways that, say, Iran will rationalize why they're building up this expert. And given that they have no oil and that they're so energy starved, you mentioned they don't have a grid, why wouldn't they do that? Why wouldn't they use nuclear power to produce electricity? Which, and the corollary to that is, does South Korea have any nuclear power plants? I mean, given that Japan had quite a few, is that an industry for them? It would seem to me to be not only cover some of their bets from the international criticism, but they need it. They need the electricity.
Yeah.
So is there nuclear power?
In North Korea? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in South Korea, there is nuclear power. The South Korean government has decided to wind it down after Fukushima, which a lot of people think is highly problematic because of the environmental costs of increasing coal power. But that's a different story. North Korea has definitely hinted at the idea of, that was the stated rationale for the nuclear power plant in North Korea to begin with. That, look, we need power, and this is a cheap way of doing it. The one thing that would make us question that, I think, is, well, North Korea has a lot of potential for hydropower already. They have a lot of rivers and waterways where that makes the most sense, and they have a lot of dams already. And also the type of nuclear power plant that they started building in the 1980s I'm not sure if there was a possibility to use it for nuclear power as well, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that that was not the main goal. But sure, it makes sense. North Korea was offered light water reactors, which is the type of nuclear reactor that you can't manufacture you can't process uranium for a nuclear bomb through light water reactors. They were offered those by the South Korea and the United States in the mid-1990s in exchange for abolishing their nuclear weapons. That deal fell through, not entirely because of North Korea. There was just too much mistrust from both sides. But yeah, nuclear power does make sense.
I want to ask a question, going back to what we talked about at the very beginning. We talked about the recent work on the possibility of Russia playing a role in all this.
Yeah.
I didn't want this conversation to end without you talking
Are we already
about
at the
that.
end?
We have just about 10 minutes
That
ago.
was
I know,
quickly.
it goes by very
I
quickly.
agree.
That's
Yeah.
right. But do the Russians have, in your opinion, right, based on your research, do the Russians have much leverage to come to play here? And what would Russia get out of helping to solve the North Korea problem?
I'm not sure how much leverage they have necessarily. I think, honestly, really the only country that has significant leverage over North Korea is China. We talk about these other countries as if though they're equal with China in this, but they're absolutely not. I think the more important thing about Russia, I would say two things. One thing is there is a great deal of knowledge in Russian sort of government institutions about North Korea. There are a lot of ties that Russia has with North Korea that few other countries have. And Russia certainly could play a role in solving the crisis. What I think is more important right now is the potential that Russia will simply start helping North Korea more and more as sanctions tighten up the flows of things like oil and other necessary supplies to North Korea. There's already been speculation that Russia is providing North Korea with a much greater proportion of their oil than we've previously known, and that during so this is again getting very granular, but gasoline prices in Pyongyang suddenly dropped a few days ago, and nobody could really explain why right at the face of it. But then there have been suggestions that it's because more shipments are coming through from Russia, and Russia has also had they have had a stated ambition since 2015 to increase trade with North Korea by a lot. They're clearly wanting to play more of a role, and I think that as both North Korea and Russia get increasingly isolated in the international community, they're finding more and more of their interests aligning.
Well, and related to that is the issue of the larger international community, right? So you as a young man in Sweden got interested in North Korea, but I was in Germany last week, and people who were very involved in discussing international affairs basically confessed in one discussion to me that they follow what's going on in North Korea, but the Europeans basically are happy to leave it for the Americans to deal with.
Yeah.
And this, of course, is
That's right,
This is
yeah.
right after they, of course, complain about how the Americans don't know what they're doing
Right.
and all this, but the Europeans don't want to take any responsibility.
I apologize for that attitude on
That's
behalf
all right.
of
I
all
won't.
Europeans, by the way.
I won't hold
Yeah.
it against. But I am curious. What role do you think that? As you say, China's got the most leverage. Russia has a profound interest. The United States, South Korea, Japan, they are obviously connected. What, if any, role does the rest of the world have to play? I mean, especially when you consider we're talking about the possibility of nuclear war. Is the rest of the world condemned to be spectators to this drama?
I don't know how to say yes to that without sounding
But
really
your answer is
defeatist, but
basically yes.
Basically, yes. So for example, I think that with everything, like every country wants to play a bigger role in any major international conflict. Like the Swedish government was going to solve the Middle East conflict, and the U.S. every U.S. president is going to solve the Middle East conflict. It's very, very hard for parties that aren't directly touched by these things to actually do anything concretely, I think. So, well, you can blame, so Nordic countries especially have played a role in being sort of sites for things like track 2 talks, which is talks with representatives of the parties that are not necessarily officials, such as former US government officials and North Koreans from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which doesn't really hold a lot of clout in North Korea.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a role, but other than, no, not really. I mean, not if we're talking about the really pivotal things that can be done.
I don't like to end on depressing notes, but,
Yeah, no,
but at least that's a
yeah.
realistic place
Yeah.
to end this conversation. Thank you, Ben Silberstein, for a terrific
Thank you.
conversation. And thank you to all of you. So as you know, right, this conversation's over, but the conversation continues on Geopolitics with Granieri. We'll be here next. We'll be here again. Follow if you want to know more about this program and about what we do at FPRI. Please visit our website, fpri.org. Follow us on Facebook. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can follow the host of this program at Ronald Granieri on Twitter. I'd like now to introduce the president of FPRI, Alan Luxembourg, who wants to say a word at the end of the program. Alan, please.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. As you know, this is our last program of the season for the Geopolitics with Granieri. So I want to make a special thanks for Ron Granieri for these great hosting of these programs. And to Ben Silberstein, who's the epitome of what we are trying to do at FPRI, which is to recruit rising young scholars and push them on their way forward in the national security community. I should add a couple of footnotes. First of all, in addition to thanking BNY Mellon, I want to thank the Stan and Arlene Ginsberg Foundation for supporting this series of programs. And there was some mention of these 2 reports that we've just posted on our website on Russia and North Korea. Although I take it you're pretty skeptical of them, because you're skeptical of a constructive Russian role. But I should mention this was a unique collaboration which FPRI undertook with scholars from the Far Eastern Federal University in Vladivostok, with the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and with the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, which, despite the fact that one of my colleagues, Clint Watts, is one of the leading commentators on the Russian disinformation and the role of interfering in our elections, we may be, since no one else in the US government wants to admit meeting with Russians, we may be the only people openly conspiring with the Russians to try to find a constructive way out of the Korean crisis. And there may be a role for Russia. That's what we've been exploring. The 2 reports are on our website, and you're welcome to read them. Finally, I thank you for your support of FPRI over the course of the year. We hope you'll continue to support us in coming months and years. And if you're not a member, please join. Thank you all very much.